8 college students hiked into Granite Peak Trail on June 15, 2018, and the search teams found only their empty tents 6 days later. Their backpacks were arranged in a perfect circle around a campfire that rangers confirmed had never been lit despite visible burn marks on surrounding stones. I was the lead investigator assigned to the case, and what I discovered during those 3 weeks of searching broke something fundamental inside my understanding of reality. The official report lists them as missing presumed dead, but I know the truth is far worse than any death the mountains could have offered them. The group consisted of 5 men and 3 women from the same university, experienced hikers who had completed this exact trail twice before without any incidents. Their trip leader was a 22-year-old named Marcus Webb, who had logged over 200 miles on Granite Peak and knew every switchback and water source intimately. His father called the ranger station when Marcus missed their scheduled check-in call, the first time his son had ever failed to make contact during a wilderness expedition. We launched the search on June 21st with helicopters and ground teams and dogs trained to detect human scent from remarkable distances in challenging mountain terrain conditions. The dogs found the campsite within 4 hours but refused to enter the clearing where the tents were pitched in formation that matched no known camping configuration. They whimpered and pulled at their leashes, and one of them bit his handler badly enough to require evacuation and stitches from the field medic. The tents were zipped closed from the outside, which is physically impossible if the occupants were inside when the zippers were sealed against the morning cold. Sleeping bags were arranged neatly with pillows fluffed and positioned as if the campers had prepared for sleep they never actually took in those strange shelters. Personal belongings remained inside each tent. Wallets and phones and journals and all the things people carry into wilderness, expecting to carry back out eventually. I found Marcus Webb's journal in his tent, and the entries from their final days on the trail described experiences that made my hands shake as I read them by flashlight. He wrote about sounds coming from the forest at night, sounds like footsteps that circled their camp for hours, but never approached close enough to be identified or confronted directly. He wrote about one of the women waking up screaming that something had been standing over her, watching her sleep, breathing on her face with breath that smelled like copper and soil. The journal entries became increasingly frantic as the days progressed, handwriting deteriorating from neat script to desperate scrawl that I could barely decipher in some sections. Marcus described the group arguing about whether to continue or turn back, about whether the sounds they heard were animals or something else entirely that defied categorization. He described a vote that ended with 5 wanting to leave immediately and 3 insisting they were overreacting to normal wilderness sounds amplified by group anxiety. The final entry was dated June 14th, the night before they were scheduled to hike out and return to their vehicles parked at the trailhead 20 miles away. Marcus wrote that something had walked into their camp while they sat around the unlit fire pit, something tall and thin that moved between their tents like it was looking for someone specific. He wrote that nobody screamed because nobody could move, could not even turn their heads to look directly at the thing that had entered their circle uninvited. The entry ended mid-sentence with words that still haunt me every time I close my eyes and try to sleep in the darkness of my bedroom at home. Marcus wrote that the thing had stopped moving and was now standing directly behind him, and he could feel it reading over his shoulder as he wrote these final words. We searched the surrounding forest for 3 weeks and found evidence that made the case more disturbing with each passing day of fruitless investigation and dead-end leads. Footprints appeared around the campsite that did not match any of the 8 hikers and were too large to be human, but too humanoid to be any known animal in the region. The prints circled each tent individually before converging on the fire pit and then vanishing completely, like whatever made them had simply ceased to exist. The burn marks on the stones around the fire pit were analyzed by specialists who confirmed the rocks had been exposed to temperatures exceeding 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. No campfire could generate such heat, and no natural phenomenon in the area could explain the precise circular pattern of the scorching that had melted stone into glass. Something had happened in that circle that science could not explain, and that official reports would later attribute to unexplained geological activity despite no evidence supporting that convenient conclusion. I interviewed the families of the missing students and discovered a pattern that the official investigation chose to ignore, despite its obvious significance to understanding events. Every one of the 8 campers had reported feeling watched in the weeks before the trip, describing the sensation as constant but unlocalized, originating from everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. 3 of them had installed security cameras at their apartments and captured footage of shadows moving past windows at 3 a.m. when no one should have been outside their locked doors. One of the women had visited a therapist 2 weeks before the trip, complaining of dreams where she walked through forests she did not recognize toward destinations she could not identify. The therapist noted that her patient described the dreams as feeling more real than waking life, as if sleep was the truth and consciousness was the illusion hiding something underneath. The therapist recommended postponing the camping trip, ignored by a young woman convinced that fresh air and exercise would cure anxieties that medication had failed to address. The search was officially called off on July 12th when funding ran out and the probability of finding survivors dropped below the threshold that justified continued resource allocation. I was transferred to administrative duties and warned not to discuss the case with media or researchers or anyone else who might ask questions that could not be answered satisfactorily by official channels. My supervisor suggested I take a vacation and forget what I had seen at that campsite if I wanted to continue my career without complications. I could not forget because the case followed me home in ways that I initially dismissed as stress and imagination working together to create symptoms that required rest rather than investigation. I started hearing footsteps circling my house at night, deliberate and measured, patient in a way that suggested intelligence behind the movement rather than random animal activity. I installed cameras and captured footage of empty space where the footstep sounds clearly originated according to the audio that my microphones recorded without fail. The other investigators on the case experienced similar phenomena, and we began meeting secretly to compare notes and theories that we could never share publicly without risking career destruction. One of them had found a second journal at the campsite that he had hidden from the official evidence collection process because its contents were too disturbing to enter into any record that might be accessed by people unprepared for the implications of what Marcus, Webb's girlfriend, had written in her final days. She described the thing that visited their camp in detail that made reading her words feel like physical contact with something contaminated and contagious and fundamentally wrong. She wrote that it wore a human shape like a costume that did not fit correctly, limbs too long and joints bending in wrong directions as it moved between their frozen forms. She wrote that it spoke to each of them individually in voices they recognized, voices of dead relatives and lost friends and people they had loved and mourned and tried to forget. She wrote that it made them an offer they could not refuse, because refusing was not possible when your body belonged to something else and your mind was just a passenger watching decisions being made without your consent or input. She wrote that they said yes because saying yes was the only option left, and because the alternative was something worse than agreement. The journal ended with coordinates that led us to a location 2 miles from the campsite, where we found something I have never reported to anyone until now. A cave entrance that appeared on no maps and that closed behind us when we entered, despite there being no mechanism visible that could have sealed the stone passageway shut. We were trapped inside for 6 hours before the entrance reopened, and we emerged into daylight that felt different, thinner, less substantial than the sunlight we remembered from before our descent into whatever that cave was hiding from the official world. Inside the cave we found belongings that matched inventories from missing persons cases stretching back decades, items from hikers who had vanished on Granite Peak and surrounding trails for over 50 years. There were journals and photographs and personal effects that should have decomposed, but remained preserved like they had been, placed there yesterday by hands that had been missing for longer than I had been alive. We found 8 backpacks arranged in a circle at the deepest point of the cave, positioned exactly like the tents at the campsite, containing items that belonged to the college students who had walked into these mountains and never walked out. But we did not find bodies, and we did not find bones, and we did not find any evidence that the 8 young people who owned those belongings had ever died in any way that would leave behind physical remains for families to bury and mourn and eventually try to forget about. I resigned from the investigation 3 days after the cave, and I have never returned to Granite Peak, despite receiving letters every month, inviting me to visit specific coordinates during specific moon phases for reasons the anonymous sender never explains. The letters are postmarked from towns that do not exist according to Postal Service databases, and are written in handwriting that matches Marcus Webb's final journal entry exactly. The other investigators have all disappeared over the past 6 years, one by one, vanishing during camping trips and hiking expeditions they had planned without telling anyone where they intended to go. The pattern is too consistent to be coincidental, but too strange to be investigated by any authority willing to acknowledge the obvious connections between cases. I am the last one left, and I have stopped going outside after dark because I can hear the footsteps circling closer each night, patient and methodical and absolutely certain that eventually I will make a mistake. I have stopped sleeping because the dreams have started and they show me forests I do not recognize and destinations I cannot avoid, no matter how hard I try to change direction. The coordinates from the latest letter match a location I visited once before. The clearing where 8 tents stood empty and a fire pit showed evidence of heat that nothing natural could have produced. The letter says they are waiting for me, and that I have been chosen the same way the college students were chosen, and that saying no is not actually an option that exists for people who have seen what I have seen. I am writing this account because someone needs to know what happened to the lost campers of Granite Peak Trail before I become one of them myself. I am writing because the official story is a lie designed to prevent panic and because the truth deserves to exist somewhere, even if believing it is impossible for anyone who has not experienced what I have experienced. The footsteps outside my window have stopped tonight, and the silence is worse than the sound, because silence means the circling has ended and the approach has finally begun. I can see a shape standing at the edge of my property, tall and thin and wearing something that looks almost like a human body, but moves in ways that human bodies cannot move. It is walking toward my door now with steps that I can feel through the floor, even though I cannot hear them anymore, because hearing has stopped working somehow. It is raising a hand that has too many fingers, and it is reaching for my doorknob, and I can already feel my body standing up without my permission. I am going to answer the door because answering is not optional for people like me who have seen too much and asked too many questions about things that were never meant to be questioned. I am going to follow it into the forest the way Marcus Webb and his friends followed it, and the way everyone who came before them followed it since before this trail had a name. Do not hike Granite Peak Trail, and do not investigate the missing campers, and do not read the journals that are hidden in evidence rooms across 3 counties, because reading them makes you visible to something that you do not want to see you. Do not accept invitations from coordinates that appear in letters without return addresses, because accepting means joining something that you can never leave once the agreement has been made. The door is opening now, and I can see what has been waiting for me since the moment I walked into that campsite 6 years ago, looking for answers. I understand finally why the students said yes, and why everyone before them said yes, and why I'm saying yes right now, even though every part of me is screaming no. It is beautiful in a way that breaks your mind to perceive, and it is offering me a hand, and I am taking it, because taking it is all that remains after the choice has already been made by something older than choices and bigger than refusal. Granite Peak is waiting, and I am finally going home to a place I have never been, but have always somehow known was coming for me. The trail never ends for those of us who walked too far into darkness. We were never meant to survive. And now there are 9 of us waiting in the forest for the next investigator who asks too many questions about campers who were never really lost at all.